Okay, welcome everyone to the class today. It's a very fascinating class today and very interesting aspect about something that the Torah writes that's seemingly not so. And we'll investigate it. And I think it's a fantastically interesting journey about what we're going to do. So the Parasha of Vayera starts off with Vayera el Avram. Avram appears to Moshe, and he speaks to him, and he tells him a message that he has to go to Pharaoh, etc., and deliver the message that he's about to say. So I'm going to share a screen at the moment just to show you some of the verses which are involved in this in the passage that we're going to discuss. Moses says the message to Pharaoh, and while he's saying the message to Pharaoh, he is introduced from the Torah by the words that he is a certain age. Now let's, as I said, I want to investigate those particular verses, and we're going to try to see them. So, as I understand, you're seeing. Do you see the verse, with Va'era 2021 on top of it?
You have Va'era el Avraham.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So the verse says Va'era el Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov b'Kel Shaddai, that I appeared to Abraham. He says that I appeared to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob and to Yaakov, and I appeared to them with the name B'Kel Shaddai, Shmi Hashem, but my name as Hashem, the full name, Lo Yinadati Lahem, I did not teach them, I did not know to them, and we'll discuss part of that as we move along.
Okay.
The next verses talk about that what his role should be, and that he should say to the Jewish people that Ani Hashem, I am the Lord, and meaning to say I am the one that's capable of taking you out, and I will free you from the labors, from all the oppression of the Egyptians, and will deliver you from the bondage. These are the verses which relate to the going out of Egypt, which we mention at the time of the Haggadah. Further, the next verses then move along and continue about what Moshe has to say to Pharaoh, and then it breaks off at verse 14 and talks about the lineage of Moshe, where he comes from. That is to say, first talks about the Shvatim, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, then starts off with saying Levi, who is his great-grandfather, and then continues with his heritage, then comes to Moshe Rabbeinu. At the end of that, the verses continue and then say, V'yas Moshe v'Aaron kasher tziva Hashem eschem kain osu, and they did what they were commanded. And then it says Moshe ben Shmenim Shana, that Moses was then 80 years old, but Aaron ben Shleisha Shmonim Shana, and he was ben Shleisha Shmonim, he was 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. Now, the motivating question of the class is really, why was it necessary for the verse to tell us how old Moshe was at that point? Now, we're going to investigate that, but let's just work this on a little bit further.
I can't see. I can only see the first verse.
Sorry?
I can only see the first verse.
Oh.
Is there any more?
Okay, so it does say that. So we can see at the end of Moses' life, post the Jews coming to Egypt, and this is the verses from Joshua, and it says that the people came up into Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. The first month is Nisan, that is to say, that's the month of where we celebrate Pesach. The next verses to talk about that the Jews encamped in Jericho and they offered the Passover sacrifice on the 14th day of the month. Now, on the words of the day after Pesach, the day that in Joshua, it talks about Memochras Pesach. This is the day of waving the Noma, and then it tells us from the 7th day of Adar is the day when Moses died. So that is approximately 5 weeks afterwards. They're already in Jericho offering the Korban Pesach. So the next verse that I want to share with you is that prior to his death, on the last day of Moses' life, he says, V'yom alehem, and he says to them, I'm now ben meya be'esrim shana, I'm now 120 years old. I can no longer be active, and Hashem has told him, you will not go across the Jordan. The Rashi on that says that Moshe on the comment, V'yelech Moshe, anechi hayom, this day of his death, hayom mole yom shnasasei. On this day, when he passed away, 7th of Adar, is 120 years, and that he passes away at 120. Okay, now we know how long the Jews were in the Egypt. So I'm going to stop the sharing over here. We know that we know now some basic numbers. We know that Moses lived a life of 120 years. We know that they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So that means that at 120 minus 14, right, which is 18, right? It was the beginning of the going of the liberation out of Israel. Now we also know from this week's Parasha that all the plagues, each plague took a time factor of 1 month. 3 weeks Moses was warning the people, was warning Egypt and Pharaoh. 1 week was the extension of each plague. There were 10 plagues. The last plague, the 10th plague, was the precursor of going out of Egypt. That happened on the night of the time of Pesach, which is the 15th of Nisan. So if we calculate the other plagues, that means the 9 first preliminary plagues, each one was a month's duration. So that's 9 months. So then it comes out that how old was Moses when he fronted Pharaoh the first time, or any of the times. He was, as we've just said, he lived 120 years, 40 years they were in the wilderness. Each plague took 1 month. So that's, and we talked about there are nine plus 10, so that's plagues. So that's 9 months. We also know, as in brackets, that Moses wasn't available for a certain period of time while he was in Egypt. That means that 9 months, the majority of a year, Moses was talking to Pharaoh. So therefore, how old was Moses when he fronted a Pharaoh? It couldn't have been 80 years. He was 79 years old, plus a few something, right? But it was not a majority of a year, certainly not even a minority of a very small amount of time. But quite clearly, I just shared with you that the verses say that Moses was 80 years old. So our question is, why is it necessary to tell us he was 80 years old? And is the Torah not telling us the full story? In that he is at this period, obviously, under 80 years, 79 years. So another question is, as I mentioned briefly, that we interrupt the story in order to tell and trace the lineage of Moshe Rabbeinu. We interrupt, as I said, from quite a number of verses, from the continuation of the story, to tell us and go over again, even though we know Moses' lineage. It's been mentioned before in the weeks before in our other parshas when we speak about Yaakov's sons, etc. So we know who he is. So why does the Torah have to go over and mention his lineage? What's the connection? So our understanding is, since everything of the Torah is exact, and since everything that's mentioned in the Torah is there to teach us a lesson, we have to ask a question to ourselves: what is the purpose of the Torah telling us that he was 80 years old? It literally says, why does the emphasis, why does the verse emphasize, and Moshe ben Shmeinim Shana, Moshe was 80 years old, as I show you from the verses. So one answer that's found in a commentary is that the purpose that the Torah is telling us his age is to actually emphasize and to make a point to us that they were, in fact, senior. They were 80 years old plus, and they were elderly people. Nevertheless, they girded themselves, they strengthened themselves to be able to go to Pharaoh and risk themselves in front of Pharaoh in order for the good of the nation. And in fact, that is a teaching for every single Jew, how much to and to what extent a person should put in effort for another Jew. And a person shouldn't say, oh, I'm too old, I can't do this, this is not appropriate for me to do in my station in life, whether it's my honor or not, or whether it's an issue of energies. We can see that we have to, even though a person might be senior in age, a person should go should do that. That is one commentary. But according to, and that's a good, beautiful teaching, but according to the simple reading of the verses, we find that Moses, in fact, was, even up to his last days, and till his 120th year. The verse tells us, the verse testifies at the end of the Torah that his strength did not wane, and his suppleness did not wane. They were at great capability. So, and we can see that even at the end of his lives, and he'd gone through so much in this period of 40 years, prior to this 80 years, he had gone through the events of Matan Torah, and he had gone through the events of waging battle and war on behalf of Israel. So we can understand that he was at his highest level of strength. And therefore, it doesn't really fit according to the simple reading of the verses that the Torah is specifically telling us this age, or the approximate his age of being in his 80s, that it was in order to teach us this lesson that we have to be strong for any single Jew. We find another explanation in relationship to this, and we're still trying to find the emphasis that even if he's 79 years old, why is the verse saying that he's 80 years old? So we come to the conclusion that we have to be told that, but there is some ulterior purpose that the Torah is telling us that even though he's 79, that he's 80 years old. So, and we also ask the question, why do we have to hear about his heritage? So, one of our Rabbis of Lubavitch, the third Lubavitch Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, points out, based on an interpretation in a commentary called Ponim Yofas, that it was necessary for the verse to tell us his lineage in order to tell us that Moshe and Aaron, because remember in the verse Moshe and Aaron are listed with their ages, that they're both in their 80s, that they are in fact the seventh generation from Avraham. And he uses the expression called Shavivim Chavivim, that all the seven are especially dear, are especially endeared to Hashem. And then he also says that in that verse of I appeared to Abraham, I appeared him with the name Kael Shakai, with the name of Hashem written as that this is a way to tell us that I appeared to Avraham utilizing this name. And what is a name? A name is a representation of oneself. So Hashem said, I revealed myself to Avraham and the sages in that form, but to you, I've revealed myself in a much holy way. What's the import of the name Kel Shaddai? What is the import of that name? The import of that name, we are told that the idea expressed in that name is this is the name which represents that Hashem, when he says that I created the world, this is the level of Hashem which it says that Hashem created the world with Shem Elokim, with the name of Elokim. That represents the idea of the powers within the world, and the powers within the world in a limited world. So Hashem says, I created the world with this name, with the idea that I have embedded into the world the capabilities of limitations, that the world has been created through the name Kel Shaddai, which that is the name which represents creation in a limited, in its limited sense, and as the verse says, that when he created them with the word Biborom, and they were created, literally means created. If you move around the letters, it spells Avraham. That is to say that the world was created with the attributes of Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov, with at least Avram, with the idea of Chesed. But my name of the full name expression of Hashem, spelt with the Yud Kei Vav Kei, that is a level which goes beyond nature. That is something which goes beyond the 6 days of creation. This is the level which is akin to Shabbos. This is the level which goes somewhat, which is beyond the world. The idea of creation of beyond 7, and that of Shabbos La Hashem, the idea of going beyond the aspects of nature. And this is what Hashem revealed himself to Moshe. So the idea of all the seventh are beloved, this is an idea that just like you have the 6 days of the week, which are for work purposes, you have the 7th day, which is special, the day of Shabbos. The 6 days for creative capability, the 7th day for resting, which is the higher revelation of Hashem. And therefore, we have to understand, therefore, we're in some aspects in a hinted aspect, we've explained one question why we need to speak about the genealogy, because Moshe Rabbeinu was the 7th in line from Avraham Avinu, and he was similarly, Moshe Rabbeinu, therefore, akin to the idea of Shabbos, Shabbos being a spiritual experience beyond the regular week. So also Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who is the 7th, the most endeared, who will be the one who will take them out of Egypt, differentiating to the forefathers who are like the beginnings of the week. And then in further interpretation, another idea that's embedded in that is the answer to the second question that we posed. What's this idea of 80 when he was really 79? What is the point of expressing that? The idea to be expressed is that when you're 79, you actually are in your 80th year. 79 is your 80th year of being alive, and that there is something very specific that the Torah wants to allude to by saying that he's that he was 80 at that time. And what is that? There is the idea that a person connects to an aspect of 8, the idea of, as expressed, that if a person is in his strength, is in his 80th years, in his 80 years. This is an idea of what's called gvura, literally translated strength, but the idea of the capability to break through any limitations that exist whatsoever. That is 70 years. The 70 years is an idea of something which comes from the middays. If we move along from the capabilities of the different attributes, when we talk about the attributes that Hashem created in the world and used the 6 days plus 7 to create the world, that refers to the 7 creative capabilities of Hashem. And when we talk about how the world is how the world has embedded in it the 10 spheres, that Kabbalistic concept that's broken up into 7 and 3. 7 refers to the 7 different creative capabilities that Hashem created the world, as we talk, the 7 spheres, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, etc. And when we talk about 7, we talk about 7 being something which relates to the world. 7, and each sphere has embedded in it the other 10. So it's 7 times 10, 70. But when we refer to Moses being 80 years, he was in his 80th year, but the Torah wants to hint at something much deeper, that Moses had a connection to the level of 80, which is something beyond. The idea of, in the Kabbalistic words, it's called the sphere of Bina, which is connected to the level which is beyond the physical, beyond the spiritual realms, even beyond the creative spiritual realms, to a much deeper, higher echelon within Hashem's created connections. The level of Keser, the level of a crown, literally meaning a crown, which is something which sits upon a person, a higher level. And this is what Moses connected to, the level of 8, the level of Gvura, the level of strength, which is the capability to break through everything. Thus, in order to take the Jews out of Egypt, Moses and Aaron were in their post-80 years, in the Shmenim Shana, in their, Moses was 80 and Aaron is listed as 83. That is, they were in their years when they could connect to the power of Shmenim of the 80, and that gave them the capability, that gave them the strength to be able to be empowered through Hashem, to be able to break through and achieve the taking the Jews out of Egypt. So with that, we can understand the connective point of why it had to mention the idea of 80, and why that's deliberately connected to the idea of going out of Egypt. Because the whole going out of Egypt, in a spiritual sense, is that a person has to go out of the lock-ins, the oppression that that they had physically in the land of Egypt, but a person also has in their own spiritual endeavors things which lock themselves up and don't allow them to expand their horizons. And this is what was the reason why the Jews who were locked up in Egypt needed Moses, their leader, to be associated with the idea of space and time, 80 years, to be able to be connected to the power which goes beyond the limitations of the physical world. And this is why it was Moses himself. Moses is the one who takes him out of Egypt, because Moses is the seventh generation from Abraham. And the seventh generation, as we said, is especially enabled. And he seventh from Moses, seventh from Abraham, connecting to the powers of our forefathers, and he himself is the person who was the one he had reached 80 years old, meaning he had reached the spiritual capabilities to be able to reveal the revelations of the highest realms of Hashem, the name of Hashem in its highest realm. And this is the level of Shabbos, even beyond the level of Shabbos of the 6 days of creation. And hence he had achieved this level of what we said was Bina, the level of beyond the level of 80, which connects to the highest strengths of Keser, as explained in Kabbalah. And he connected to even the highest realms within that area. He connected to the deepest levels, which gave him the strength to be able to deliver the messages of Hashem and implement the activity that Hashem wanted him to be able to do, the miracles, which those miracles of the 10 plagues, breaking nature, breaking the powers of nature, to reveal all the holiness of Hashem, and to show the power which is beyond nature to people even those who are steeped in the highest levels, in the deepest levels of uncleanliness, and the idea of Pharaoh, of spiritual depths that could not see, and was able to bring the Jewish people to their redemption. As we said, it had to be Moses is the specific one. Nevertheless, we have to enumerate. The verse goes to great extremes to enumerate his connection back to Abraham. Why was it necessary to speak about Abraham and his forefathers? Because our forefathers are the ones that give us the give us the strength, give us, as we say in Hebrew, nesinus koyach. They give us the strength to be able to forge ahead, built on what they said. And it is our forefathers who, as it said, our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who were, it tells us in other places in Gemara that they were born in the Nisan period, in the month of Nisan, and the month of Nisan is the time of revelations, is the time of Pesach, going out of Egypt. And because the advantage of the forefathers are so strong, that they gave us the strength, even though it says in relationship to our forefathers that they were the beginnings. We need the capabilities that we have from our great forefathers to be embedded in the advantage of Moshe, who is the 7th generation, to be able to gave Moshe Rabbeinu the strength to be able to do the ultimate redemption. Now we find that our forefathers are called the Avos Rishonim. our forefathers, our beginning forefathers. We would and Rashi on our verse of the Eir Elikim mentions and says, Obasa Rishonim, our forefathers from the beginning, our first forefathers. It can be asked, why does Rashi have to mention our forefathers, our first forefathers? Why do we need this extra word of first in there? It's explained, we know who our forefathers were. And in fact, our rabbis teachers, Ein Karen Obas, Ela Shleisha. There's of our forefathers are only the first three, which are Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The other tzaddikim of mention of Bereshis are not of the same level. They're only those three are called the Obas, our forefathers. So why does Rashi have to mention? Why do we use the expression Obas HaRishonim, our first forefathers? What does that mean? We can understand and we can infer from that although they're regularly called the forefathers, at this point in our learnings about Moshe Rabbeinu and the strength that Moshe Rabbeinu was given from Hashem, that was empowered by his forefathers, and that's why the Torah had to speak those previous verses beforehand. But we speak about the strength of our forefathers as they exist, Harishenim, in their original root, in their spiritual root, in the highest realms, even in the realms of Keser, even in the realms of the crown, or that spiritual level, which we call the crown. That is to say, Moshe Rabbeinu achieved the levels of our forefathers as they exist in Hashem's spiritual energies, even at the highest level, at the level of Rishonim. Rishonim means first, meaning something of the beginnings, even the highest realms of the spiritual evolution. This is what Rashi is implying and teaching us, that, and this is the expression, Ovas HaRishonim, the power of the Ovas HaRishonim, the power of our forefathers who are called the Rishonim. They take on those powers, and those powers were passed on to Moshe Rabbeinu, and those powers were given to Moshe Rabbeinu to the point where from a viewpoint we can say, where Moshe is sometimes mentioned, that he's not to be compared to the forefathers, as in the verse of the beginning of our Parasha, it says, that I appeared to my Obas with this limited revelation of the name of Kel Shaddai. It also implies, Rashi tells us, that our forefathers had the greatest belief and didn't need the revelations that Moshe was asking for, and that they were so great because they come from, and they are the Ovas HaRishonim. They take a root in the highest levels. Nevertheless, Moshe Rabbeinu, on his shlichus, on his agency from Hashem, where he has to take out the Bnei Yisrael in order to fulfill the promise to our forefathers, he needed the energies, he needed to take from the energies, the spiritual powers of the Ovas Rishonim, of our forefathers, as they exist in the highest spiritual realms, where Hashem made a eternal covenant, Christus Bris, where he made the eternal covenant with Abraham, and the promise to Abraham that he will be connected with his children forever, and that was embedded, that level of promise and that level of connection of Hashem to the Bnei Yisrael was given to, and that empowered to, Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's also why this power of the revelation of being the redemption of the Bnei Yisrael happened in the month of Nisan, because this is the time when our forefathers were born. This is the idea that they gave him these capabilities to pass on, and gave him the strength. Moshe Rabbeinu given the strength to be empowered to achieve the eventual redemption of the Jews out of Egypt. That is to say, that Moshe Rabbeinu needed the strength from the level of the forefathers as they were in the level of Rishonim, as they exist in the highest realms rooted in the level of Keser, and that was passed on to him via the month of Nisan, which in that month is born our forefathers. That spiritual powers are embedded to Moshe Rabbeinu, but together with the power that Moshe Rabbeinu has to bring out from himself, that he is a physical person and a spiritual person embedded in a physical body, but he took also from the strength of being 80 years old, that is the idea of a person's personal service to the level of 80, which is something which is beyond physical constraints, that he was called in his 80th year. And this way, he was capable of attaching himself to the level of Bina, the level of 80, the level of Keser, Bina, which connects to Keser, and going beyond the constraints of this physical world, even beyond the constraints of the forefathers as they were in a physical connection, and go to their source and root in their souls, and to be able to utilize all that and to be able to permeate in his own body those capabilities to go beyond all the constraints of the world. And this was all needed, and this was all needed to harness to be able to fulfill Hashem's request of and Hashem's promise to take the Jews out of Egypt. And in fact, this is a lesson for us in our own personal service on a day-to-day basis, because we have this expression, and we say in the Haggadah of Pesach, "B'chol day b'day, b'chol yom b'yom," in every single generation, and in fact in every single day, a person has to see himself as if he went out of Egypt, as if he came out of Egypt this day. And this is an idea which we emphasize and should be emphasized when we say our Shema, on a daily basis. This is the idea of, when we say the Shema, that we connect to Hashem in a way of going out of our own personal limitations, liberating ourselves from our own personal Egypt, liberating ourselves from our own personal constraints that we have in our own lives. And we need to infuse that in our entire day. We say Kriya Shema in the morning, and we say it every single day, but we also say it in the evening, and we say it every night, so that when we embed our day and our nights with this idea that even though I have to be involved in the physical world and work and interact with everything that exists in this world. Nevertheless, I have to harness, and I can harness via the Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader of Hashem, the leader of the Bnei Yisrael, our own neshama. We can leverage the part of Moshe Rabbeinu in our own selves, and every single person has that. We can leverage that to connect to the idea of Shmenim Shana, the idea of 80 years, and give us the strength to move out of our own Mitzrayim, our own Golus, our own exile. And we can do that by setting up our times for learning Torah, and even more, by not allowing ourselves to be locked in to the time constraints of the physical world, and to the time constraints of the watch. And we learn in a way of going beyond the physical world. At least in the times that we have, we try to go even beyond that and add in more and not be locked in by the constraints. Then we can connect to the idea of the ultimate geula, the ultimate redemption, in a physical sense and as well as a spiritual sense. And we do that by connecting to the one who gave us the Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Moshe Rabbeinu in every side of us, inside of ourselves, the Moshe Rabbeinu in every generation, who teaches us Torah, and we allow that connective point that we have, this Moshe Rabbeinu connective point that we have inside of ourselves, and that can speak to the para that we have inside of ourselves, to be able to break through and affect change, and to the point where we will then be redeemed from the bondage that we have to the things which stop us. And then when we break that connection, even though we still exist in this world, we'll be able to go out from our own personal exile, and we'll be able to go to the ultimate of freedom. Okay, with that, I hope that everybody enjoyed the class, and that we take this lesson from our Parasha of the week of Vayera. Okay, have a good week and a enjoyable Shabbos.